Hi, my name's Caroline. I'm in this class with everyone. This is weird. So basically, we are doing a project on coping mechanisms for families with addiction, and we are interviewing me because my dad is an alcoholic. So basically, growing up, we didn't really talk about the addiction until my parents got divorced, and we had to talk about said addiction. And it still played like a major role in my family before the divorce, during the divorce, and after the divorce, even now, just because he wants to be a part of our lives, but he's very self-centered just because of his addiction. And so he also had a very hard time when my stepdad came into the picture, and when my parents got remarried, he started drinking even more, and he's missed just a lot of milestones in my life. But one of the reasons that I've chosen this career path is because of him and his addiction. And so one of the reasons that we wanted to choose this topic is because there's just coping mechanisms for families isn't widely talked about, and we think it's really important to talk about coping mechanisms for families with addiction. So before we get started, I just wanted to give a brief explanation of what addiction is, not necessarily like a textbook quote, but addiction can really be anything that anyone is physically, mentally, or emotionally dependent on, where they can't go a day without it. And we have this hedonic set point in our brain that the more that you use or do that act or use a substance, the hedonic set point keeps getting raised, so you need to do it more and more for to actually feel pleasure. So addiction can be substance like drugs, alcohol, tobacco, really anything like that. And then there can also be behavioral addictions like eating disorders, self-harm, codependency, love addiction, sex addiction, gambling, gaming, shopping. Really any of those can be an addiction, and it doesn't miss anyone. Addiction doesn't discriminate, so there can really be and anyone is susceptible to it, especially children of addicts are 40% more likely to be addicted to something. So for me, since my dad is an alcoholic and an addict, there's a 40% chance that I will be addicted to pills, drugs, alcohol, shopping, an obsessive compulsion disorder, anything like that. So addiction doesn't mean just alcohol or just drugs. It can also mean a variety of other topics as well. So we just wanted to give a brief explanation of that before we jump into what addiction looked like in my family and how families, including communication, can really have a healthy environment in their family.
How many siblings do you have, and are you the oldest, youngest, or middle child?
I have a biological brother, a stepsister, and a stepbrother, and I am the oldest.
How old were you when you found out that your father had an addiction?
However old you are when you're in 7th grade, so 10, 12, somewhere around there. I was not a teenager yet.
Was it progressive, or do you think it came out of the blue for you, finding out?
It was definitely out of the blue, but it was progressive for everyone else.
Many older siblings become role models or protectors to their younger siblings. Do you think that because of the addiction, this was enhanced for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think their addiction ever hindered communication in your family?
Yes, because there were very strict rules about what we were talking about when it came to the addiction. So if a subject ever came up that had something to do with the addiction, it was very private, very secretive. There are lots of boundaries that we couldn't cross because of it. So communication was very messy because some of those rules were known by parents, but also not known for the kids. So when it came to us having normal conversations with people in our family, with people at school, with neighbors, we never really knew how or if we could talk about it, even with each other, just because those rules and boundaries were very hazy and very rigid.
Did this add more stress to you?
Oh, absolutely, especially because you want to talk to someone about it, and you want to go to your mom or you want to go to your dad and talk about it, but no one wanted to talk about it. So then you kind of just had to sit and let it fester, and that, along with the unknown rules, definitely made communication just that much more difficult in my family.
Did they ever miss any important events in your life because of drinking?
Yes. When I was a junior in high school, I was involved with the special needs students, and I was a date for one of them for their prom, and my dad was so drunk that he couldn't even get a cab, he couldn't drive. His fiance at the time wouldn't drive him, and that was really, really huge because that started my passion for special needs kids, and the fact that he wasn't there for that was really hard. He didn't come to my prom, he didn't come to my high school graduation. There's just a lot of things that he missed, either because he was drunk or he was too ashamed of his disease that he didn't want to show his face, etc.
How do you think missing these events took its toll on your family?
I think for my dad, he knew that he had an issue, but he just wasn't willing to come to terms with it. So it was very heavy and shameful for him because he didn't go. It made my mom very, very frustrated that he wasn't supportive. It made me feel like he didn't care about me. And it just really, really messed a lot of things up, but it wasn't that he didn't want to come, it was that he didn't want to talk about it, and he thought that if he came to anything, then we would have to suddenly talk about it in front of everyone, which wasn't the case, but yes.
As a parent, this person may have been seen as a major financial provider in your family. With their addiction, do you think that there was a role change in this area?
Yes. When my parents got divorced, my mom ended up having to get a job again teaching, and so we were in 2 different school districts, so now she was really the main financial provider, and my brother and I had to take the bus home, and there were different holidays because we were in different school districts, and so my mom really had to take on the father role, the mom role, the financial provider, the planner. Really, she did everything by herself, and then my dad was living alone, and he kept losing his job, so and he still to this day does not pay for anything, and it's my mom and my stepdad, so he kind of stripped himself of that role. He was really never the financial provider, but then my mom stepped into that role instead.
In what ways do you think your family was trying to help your father cope with his addiction?
I think by helping him cope, they didn't want him to come face to face or come to terms with his addiction, and so in order for them to quote cope, it was not really coming face to face with the issue at hand, so it was more just shoving it under the rug and not talking about it and not worrying about it and acting like it wasn't an issue. So we didn't have good coping mechanisms or coping strategies whatsoever. But looking back now, there's obviously definitely a lot of strategies that a family themselves can put into play for better communication roles, the mental health and physical health and emotions of everyone involved, and then just specifically for the person with the addiction.
Did your father welcome help from your family?
No. He just didn't like the idea of knowing that he was doing something wrong, just because growing up for him, he always felt like he was doing something wrong, so when he was an adult, he finally felt like he had his life together, so the fact that this addiction was something that showed that he didn't have it together was very hard for him, and yeah, he didn't like help at all, because then it showed that he was in the wrong, so.
Do you think that there was a crucial turning point for your family or your father?
I think when he went to rehab, it was a turning point, but he also never really, just AA is a coping mechanism or a coping strategy for people with addiction. Because he didn't think he had a problem, he didn't enact those, so he really just let everything fall down the drain. But a turning point for me was when my mom and stepdad got married, because I was finally in a family where addiction wasn't present. I was finally in an environment where I had a mom and dad who loved me. But yeah, coping mechanisms for an addict are super important in bringing the family role back to a nice homeostasis, a nice balance, but that just wasn't the case for us.
Okay. Families deal with stress in a sequential process. The first level is changing or adapting existing rules, ways of doing things, and rearranging responsibilities to address the stress. As mentioned in Caroline's interview, all of her family dealt through all of those issues. The second level is changing the meta rule, which are the rules about the rules. So the new area of rules are created to address the stress. The third level is changing the basic assumption about life, reordering value structure to address the stress.
Limitations of family systems theory is that it focuses on the group but tends to overlook individual issues. Using this theory, responsibility for problems is placed on the family rather than the individuals, who may be ill or genetically predisposed to certain disorders.